There are movies that you watch on a Friday night just to pass the time. You finish them, you move on, and by the next morning you have already forgotten them. But then there are movies that are different. Movies that do something to you that you cannot quite explain. Movies that stay with you long after the credits roll. And then, once in a very long while, a movie comes along that does something even rarer. It doesn't just stay with you, it becomes a part of you. In 1995, the world was a different place. There was no streaming, no social media, no algorithms telling you what to watch next. You had to go out, buy a ticket, sit in a dark room full of strangers, and trust that what was about to unfold on that screen was worth your time. That year, one film asked for your trust more than any other. It was loud. It was brutal. It was deeply emotional. And it was telling a story that most people in Hollywood believed nobody wanted to see. The studios were nervous. The industry insiders were skeptical. And yet something happened when that film hit the screens. Something nobody could have predicted. People didn't just watch it. They felt it in their bones. They walked out of cinemas changed. Some of them went back the very next day and watched it again. And again. And again. Look at these faces. Young, fierce, full of fire. In 1995, they stepped onto one of the most ambitious film sets ever created. They wore the war paint. They carried the swords. They charged across those legendary battlefields. And they gave everything they had to bring this story to life. Now look at them today. The years have passed. The world has changed around them. But the film they made together, that has never changed. It still hits exactly the same way it did on day one. Maybe even harder now. Because now we know what it cost them to make it. And here is something that most people still don't know. One of these faces, one of the people you are looking at right now, almost never made it to this film at all. We will get to that, I promise you. And the man behind the camera, the one who dreamed this whole thing into existence, he was told over and over again that this film would fail. That it was too long, too violent, too ambitious. That nobody cared about Scotland in the 13th century. He didn't listen. And what he created instead changed the course of cinema forever. This is Braveheart, the story, the legacy, the truth behind the legend. Let's begin. When Braveheart came out in 1995, nobody was fully prepared for what they were about to experience. This was not just another Hollywood epic. This was something raw, something angrier, something that felt almost too real for a movie screen. The story begins in the Scottish Highlands. A young boy watches his father and brother taken from him by the cruelty of English rule. He has nothing left. Just a memory of what was lost and a quiet fire burning somewhere deep inside him. That boy grows up. He comes back to his homeland as a man who wants nothing more than a quiet life, a small farm, a woman he loves, a chance to live in peace. He finds her, the woman who makes him believe that peace is possible. They marry in secret, away from the eyes of the English soldiers who patrol the land like they own it. But peace in Scotland in the 13th century was never going to last long. The English soldiers come. And in one single act of brutal, senseless violence, everything our hero has built is taken from him, the woman he loves. The future he had imagined, gone. And that quiet fire that had been burning inside him since he was a boy, it stops being quiet. What follows is one of the most extraordinary stories of rebellion ever put on a film screen. He raises an army, not an army of trained soldiers or wealthy knights, an army of ordinary men. Farmers, shepherds, men with nothing left to lose, and he tells them something different. He tells them that they are worth something, that their lives matter. That freedom is not something that is given to you. It is something you fight for. Now here is where the film does something that separates it from every other war epic of its era. Think about Schindler's List in 1993. Think about Dances with Wolves in 1990. These were films that understood that true epic storytelling is not about the battles. It is about the people inside the battles. Braveheart understood that better than almost any film before or since. Because yes, the battles in this film are extraordinary. When that charge happens on the battlefield, when those Scottish clans come roaring across the open ground, you don't just watch it. You feel it in your entire body. The clans. That word matters more than people realize. The clan system of medieval Scotland was not just a military structure. It was a way of life, a way of identity. These men were fighting for their clans, for their families going back generations, for a way of life that was being slowly strangled out of existence. Braveheart understood that and put it on screen in a way that hit audiences like a battering ram. And then there is the English king, Edward I, known in history as the Hammer of the Scots, one of the most ruthless rulers medieval England ever produced. In this film, he is portrayed as cold, calculating, and absolutely without mercy. He is a man who is always 3 moves ahead, and watching him go up against our fierce, passionate, emotional hero creates one of the greatest cat-and-mouse dynamics in cinema history. That speech did not just motivate a fictional Scottish army in 1995. It has been played at sports events, at military ceremonies, at graduation speeches. People have it tattooed on their bodies. That is what happens when a piece of storytelling transcends its medium. It stops being a movie moment. It becomes a real thing in the real world. The film builds and builds toward its inevitable ending. And if you know your Scottish history, you know that this story does not end with a victory on the battlefield. It ends with something far more powerful than that. It ends with a moment of such raw, defiant humanity that audiences around the world sat in their cinema seats and wept openly. But here is the thing about Braveheart that even the Oscars don't fully capture. This film planted a seed that grew into films like Gladiator, into The Last Samurai, into the entire visual language of epic historical cinema that we still use today. Without Braveheart, the sword and sandal epic genre looks completely different. And it all started with one man, one vision, one absolutely unreasonable belief that this story needed to be told. The man behind Braveheart was not supposed to be a director. At least that is what Hollywood thought in the early 1990s. He was known as an action star, a box office draw. He had already shown the world what he could do in front of a camera with films like Mad Max and Lethal Weapon. But what was burning inside him had everything to do with what was behind the camera. The Irish landscape around County Wicklow and Trim Castle became medieval Scotland. Trim Castle in particular became one of the most important locations in the entire film. Now let us talk about the casting. Brendan Gleeson was brought in to play one of the fierce Scottish warriors. At the time, Gleeson was not the globally recognized name he would later become. But there was something about him that was absolutely undeniable on screen. David O'Hara joined the cast in a role that became one of the most memorable supporting performances in the film. His character brought a wild, unpredictable energy to every scene he appeared in. There is a specific moment with David O'Hara on that battlefield that audiences never forget. Patrick McGoohan was cast as Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots. His portrayal of that king is one of the most quietly terrifying performances in the entire film. He never shouts. He never rages. And somehow that makes him 10 times more frightening than any screaming villain could ever be. The music deserves its own conversation because James Horner created something truly timeless for this film. The Braveheart main theme. The haunting pipes, the swell of strings across those highland landscapes. Outlawed tunes on outlawed pipes became one of the most emotionally devastating pieces of film music ever recorded. When you hear it today, even out of context, Something happens in your chest that is very hard to explain. The night of the Academy Awards in 1996 was a moment when the film industry had to reckon with something it had been skeptical about just months before. Braveheart walked into that ceremony with 10 nominations. When Best Picture was announced and Braveheart's name was called, something shifted in the film industry that night. Best Director went to Mel Gibson that same night, his first time directing a feature film, and he was taking home the Oscar for Best Director. By the time the night was over, Braveheart had won 5 Academy Awards. The film inspired a massive surge of interest in Scottish history. Tourism to Scotland increased measurably after Braveheart came out. Tourists were showing up at Stirling Bridge and other Scottish landmarks specifically because they had seen them in the movie, and the influence on cinema itself was profound and immediate. Think about The Last Samurai, which came out in 2003. That film owes a significant debt to Braveheart. Gladiator, which came out in 2000, is another film that clearly learned from watching Braveheart very carefully. Game of Thrones, the massive television phenomenon that dominated culture for a decade, owes stylistic and thematic debts to Braveheart. The way it depicted medieval warfare. The way it understood that politics and personal honor are often in conflict. The film also influenced how Hollywood thought about violence and brutality on screen. Braveheart showed that you could depict violence in a way that was both artistically compelling and unflinching. Today, nearly 30 years after Braveheart came out, the film still holds up remarkably well. When people watch it today, they are affected by it in much the same way that audiences were affected in 1995. That is the mark of a truly great film. The film spawned merchandise, video games, and countless references in popular culture. People tattoo quotes from Braveheart on their bodies. People name their children after characters from the film. There is a moment that happens at the very end of Braveheart that most people do not fully process the first time they watch it. The main character is facing the absolute worst moment of his life. That is the moment where Braveheart stops being just a movie and becomes something else entirely. Remember that great cinema does not happen by accident. It happens because people care enough to fight for it. It happens because directors and actors and musicians and crew members believe in something so deeply that they will risk everything to bring it to the world. Sometimes saying yes to something that everyone told you would fail is the best decision you will ever make. Sometimes standing alone and fighting for your vision is exactly what the world needs. That is the legacy of Braveheart. That is what it still means. That is why it will continue to matter for generations to come.